In the fading light of a brutal dusk where the shadows of the jagged cliffs kissed the restless waves below, an old lighthouse stood sentinel against the unforgiving sea, a reminder of both guidance and solitude. Its keeper, a man named Caleb, had long retreated from the world, haunted by the specters of his past and the weight of tragedy that hung around him like the ever-present fog. He had sought solace in the isolation of this rocky outpost, far removed from the clamor of society, only to be reminded by the relentless tide that some wounds never fully heal. Caleb had once been a lawman, a man of principles and courage, but the passing years had worn down his spirit, each storm eroding the resolve he once took pride in. The lighthouse had become his refuge, a place where the echoes of laughter and love had faded into the salty air, leaving only memories of what could have been. His days were marked by the rhythmic crashing of waves and the lonely calls of seabirds circling overhead, a stark contrast to the vibrant life he had once known. Yet all that changed one fateful evening when a distant figure emerged from the mist, stumbling through the underbrush. It was a group of Native Americans, their faces etched with fear and desperation. As they drew closer, Caleb could see their ragged clothing and the hollow look in their eyes, a reflection of a life lived on the brink of survival. His heart raced, torn between the teachings of his youth and the bitter prejudices ingrained in him by a world that had cast these people aside. He could feel the weight of their gaze, pleading for help, for sanctuary. But Caleb's mind swirled with the memories of how the world had treated his kind with disdain, how trust had been a currency long since spent. To assist these individuals would mean defying the unspoken rules of his community, risking the ire of those who saw them as nothing more than a nuisance. A strong gust of wind swept through the clearing, as if urging him to act, forcing him to confront the reality of his own heart. In that moment, the stakes became terrifyingly clear. To help would mean stepping into a storm of conflict, to risk everything he had built in his years of solitude. Yet, to turn them away would condemn them to a fate he could not bear to imagine. His conscience wrestled with the ghosts of the past, each heartbeat echoing the question that now consumed him. Who was he if he turned his back on those in need? As Caleb took a tentative step forward, the air thick with tension, he noticed the unmistakable insignia on one of the men's clothing, a mark of the Crow tribe, one of the most persecuted in the region. A wave of recognition washed over him, intertwining with a flicker of hope. He recalled the stories his father had shared by the fire, tales of a time when honor and integrity held meaning, when helping those in need was a fundamental truth of humanity. In that instant, the decision crystallized within him, fierce and unwavering. He would help them. He motioned for them to approach, his voice steady but soft, a stark contrast to the tempest raging inside him. They hesitated, wary of his intentions, but the urgency of their plight outweighed their fears. As they drew near, a sense of purpose ignited within him, dispelling the shadows that had long clouded his heart. For the first time in years, Caleb felt alive, not just as a lighthouse keeper, but as a man willing to confront the darkness of a world that had tried to swallow him whole. Yet just as hope began to bloom, a foreboding silence enveloped them, as if the very air held its breath. The truth of the landscape around them was stark, a world filled with both beauty and brutality, and Caleb knew that their arrival would not go unnoticed. In the distance, a rider appeared on horseback, silhouetted against the setting sun, the dust of the trail swirling around him like a dark omen. Caleb recognized him instantly, a deputy known for his ruthlessness, a man who thrived on the fear of others. The deputy's eyes glinted with malice as he surveyed the scene, sensing the tension that crackled in the air. Caleb felt a chill run down his spine, the weight of his decision pressing heavily upon him. The man's presence was a reminder that the choices he made would not only affect him, but would set in motion a chain of events that could shatter the fragile peace he had fought so hard to maintain. "Are you sure about this?" he heard one of the Native Americans whisper, their voice trembling with apprehension. Caleb met their gaze, the challenge of the moment reflected in their eyes. He knew that his answer would define not just their fates, but his own as well, tethered together by the fragile thread of humanity. "I don't know what's coming," Caleb replied, his voice steady, though the storm raged inside him. but I can't stand by and watch them suffer. Not anymore. He stepped forward, placing himself between the vulnerable group and the encroaching darkness, ready to face whatever came next, a lone lighthouse keeper against the tide of injustice. But as the deputy drew closer, Caleb understood that this was only the beginning, a prelude to a confrontation that would unravel truths buried deep beneath the surface. He would soon discover that the struggle for survival was woven with intricate threads of betrayal and courage, where alliances would form in the most unlikely places, and the fight against oppression would require not just strength, but an unwavering belief in what was right. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape into shadows, Caleb stood resolute, a solitary figure against the vastness of the west, ready to chart a course through the storm, guided by the flickering light of hope that had ignited within him. The deputy's eyes glinted with a predatory hunger, his confidence bolstered by the knowledge that he held power in this land. He approached, a slow swagger in his step, as if he were a wolf circling its prey. "You think you can protect them, Caleb?" He sneered, his voice a low rumble echoing with the weight of authority. "This ain't no place for the likes of them or you. You're just a washed-up lighthouse keeper living in a ghost town." Caleb felt the tension coil within him, a pressure that came not just from fear but from the knowledge of what was at stake. "They have nowhere else to go," he replied, his tone unwavering. "You can't drive them away just because they don't look like us." The deputy laughed, a sound devoid of humor, sharp as a knife. "You think you're going to change the world with some misplaced sense of justice? These folks are better off in the ground than here, stirring up trouble." With each word, Caleb's resolve hardened. The shadows of his past loomed large, but they were no match for the flicker of hope ignited in his heart. "You're wrong," he said firmly. "They deserve a chance, just like anyone else. You'll have to go through me first." The deputy's face darkened, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. But then his lips curled into a malicious smile, revealing a mind that thrived on chaos. "Fine. If you want to play the hero, let's see how far that gets you. I've got friends in high places, and they'll be interested to know just what you're hiding out here." As the deputy turned, Caleb felt the weight of looming threats, not just for himself, but for the people he had chosen to protect. He had no illusions about the dangers ahead, but he also recognized that the deputy's threat stretched far beyond their immediate confrontation. There were whispers of a larger scheme, one that involved the manipulation of fear and prejudice to seize control of the land and its people. Caleb knew he needed allies, but trust was a fragile thing in these parts. He thought of the townsfolk, of their whispers and glances, the way they clung to old grudges like an old coat. If he were to rally them against the deputy and his ilk, he had to find a way to shift the tide. As night fell, the winds howled like restless spirits, and Caleb gathered the Native Americans around a flickering fire. He listened to their stories, their struggles woven into the fabric of the land, and he felt the weight of their pain resonate within him. They spoke of loss, of families torn apart by greed and malice, and in their eyes he saw reflections of his own past, a past where he had stood by, silent. But Caleb also saw strength in them, a resilience forged through hardship. "We're going to need each other," he said, his voice steady despite the tremors of doubt that seeped through his resolve. "The deputy won't stop until he's taken everything from us. We have to stand together." The group exchanged glances, and Caleb could see the flicker of hope beginning to kindle. They nodded slowly, their shared resolve growing like the embers of their fire, and together, they began to plot a course of action. As the stars emerged, Caleb felt a shift in the air, a sense of purpose that had eluded him for too long. The deputy had underestimated the power of unity, and Caleb was determined to expose the truth behind the corruption that ran deeper than any river in these rugged lands. The following days would be fraught with danger, but Caleb understood the stakes. The confrontation was not just about standing against a man, it was about dismantling a system that thrived on division. Armed with knowledge and newfound alliances, Caleb set his plan in motion, knowing that the real battle was yet to come. He would uncover the deputy's ties to the corrupt businessmen who sought to profit from fear, and he would shine a light on the truth that had long remained hidden in the shadows of the West. In the heart of darkness, the lighthouse keeper would become a beacon of hope, illuminating a path forward for those who dared to dream of a future free from oppression. As dawn broke over the rugged horizon, Caleb gathered his newfound allies, the two Native Americans whose lives now intertwined with his own. They shared stories of their people's struggle, each tale a thread woven into the fabric of the land. Together, they forged a bond stronger than the fiercest storm, united by a common goal. Caleb knew that knowledge was his greatest weapon. He set out to investigate the dark dealings of the deputy and the businessmen who conspired to drive a wedge between their communities. With each passing hour, he uncovered whispers of land grabs and intimidation, a network of deceit that left a bitter taste in his mouth. The more he learned, the clearer it became that the deputy was merely a pawn in a larger game, one that involved powerful figures who thrived on chaos. One evening, as shadows stretched long across the dusty ground, Caleb devised a plan to confront the deputy. They would gather evidence, documents, testimonies, anything that could expose the web of corruption. But they needed to tread carefully. The deputy was not a man known for his restraint when cornered. Caleb's heart pounded as he contemplated the risks. His own past haunted him, a reminder of the costs of standing against those in power. In the days that followed, they worked under the cover of darkness, slipping into places where secrets festered. The abandoned shanties and dilapidated warehouses whispered of the past, revealing crumpled papers and hastily drawn maps that pointed to illicit deals. The more they uncovered, the more the stakes rose. Caleb's resolve hardened. He could not turn back now. As tensions mounted, word of their investigation began to spread through the town. Some whispered of Caleb's alliance with the Native Americans, fanning the flames of prejudice and fear. The deputy's eyes narrowed as he took notice, sensing a threat to his authority that could not be tolerated. He began to spread lies, casting doubt on Caleb's motives, branding him a traitor to his own kind. But Caleb remained steadfast. He knew that truth had a way of cutting through the noise, that the light of justice would eventually shine through the murk of deceit. With the hour of confrontation drawing near, he and his allies planned their final move. They would confront the deputy in public, exposing him before the townsfolk who had been misled. On the day of the showdown, the townspeople gathered at the saloon, drawn by the tension that crackled in the air. Caleb stood at the center of the room, flanked by his allies, determination etched into his rugged face. The deputy strode in, confidence radiating from his every step. But Caleb could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes as he caught sight of the gathering crowd. As the deputy opened his mouth to speak, Caleb stepped forward, brandishing the evidence they had collected. The room fell silent, and the weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Caleb's voice rang out, steady and unwavering, as he laid bare the truth, the corruption, the exploitation, the lies that had divided them for too long. In that instant, the tide began to turn. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the crowd, and the deputy's bravado faltered. Caleb's allies shared their own stories, voices rising in solidarity, drowning out the deputy's desperate attempts to regain control. The truth, like the dawn, began to break over the horizon, illuminating the dark corners where fear had once thrived. But just as victory seemed within reach, a twist of fate revealed itself. An unexpected figure emerged from the crowd, a man with ties to the very businessmen Caleb sought to expose. With a chilling smile, he stepped forward, ready to play his hand, threatening to unravel everything they had fought for. In that moment, Caleb realized that the battle was far from over. The true confrontation lay ahead, but now he had allies, a community ready to rise against the tide of corruption. As the shadows deepened, Caleb felt the weight of history on his shoulders, knowing that the choices they made in this gritty theater of the West would echo through the ages. The morning sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the parched earth as Caleb braced himself for the storm that was brewing. The air was thick with tension, every breath heavy with the knowledge that the corrupt man was coming. Word had traveled fast, and now they all stood waiting for the confrontation that would determine their fates. The townsfolk, emboldened by Caleb's rallying cry, positioned themselves, casting wary glances toward the horizon, where the dust cloud heralded the arrival of the enemy. A figure emerged, riding tall on a black stallion, his silhouette sharp against the backdrop of the rising sun. It was Sheriff Langston, a man whose reputation for ruthless enforcement overshadowed any sense of justice. He had spent years consolidating power, feeding on the fears of the people. Caleb's heart raced as he saw the unmistakable arrogance in Langston's approach. A crooked smile stretching across his face, a cruel reminder of the stakes at hand. "Caleb!" Langston called out, his voice a mix of mockery and menace. "You've stirred up quite the ruckus, haven't you? Gave the folks something to believe in, a false hope." Caleb stood firm, the weight of the moment pressing against his resolve. "I'm giving them the truth, Langston. You've built your empire on lies and fear, and it's time for that to end." Langston's laughter echoed through the air, a sound devoid of warmth. "You think you can change things? You think you can save them?" He gestured dismissively to the Native Americans huddled behind Caleb, vulnerable, yet determined. "These people are nothing but a pawn in your game, Caleb. Do you really think they trust you?" A ripple of unease passed through the crowd, but Caleb would not yield. "Trust is earned, Sheriff, and I've earned theirs by standing with them against your tyranny." With that, Langston's eyes narrowed, the smile slipping from his lips. "Then let's see how much that trust is worth when the truth comes out." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that carried through the gathering. "You don't know who they really are, do you? Or what they've done?" Confusion flickered across Caleb's face. "What are you talking about?" Langston leaned back, a self-satisfied glint in his eye. "You think they're just victims? They've been hiding from more than just you and me. They've got blood on their hands too, Caleb. The very blood you're trying to protect." The crowd tensed, a mix of disbelief and anger brewing among them. Caleb's heart raced as he struggled to process Langston's words. "You're lying," he spat, though doubt crept in like a thief in the night. "Oh, am I?" Langston chuckled darkly. "Let me introduce you to your new friends." He gestured to two of the Native Americans, their faces suddenly strained with the weight of unspoken secrets. "You see, they're not just innocent bystanders. They're part of a clan that's been raiding ranches for years." The accusation hung heavy in the air, and Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him. "That's not possible," he replied, his voice faltering. "Isn't it?" Langston pressed. "You've put your trust in the wrong people, Caleb, and now you stand to lose everything." As the crowd murmured, Caleb turned to the Native Americans, searching their faces for answers. One of them stepped forward, a woman with fierce eyes that seemed to pierce through the tension. "It's true," she said, her voice steady, "but not in the way he means. We've fought to protect our land from those who would take it from us, just like you." The revelation hung in the air, a tangled web of truths and lies. Caleb's mind raced, and he could feel the weight of his choices pressing down upon him. The battle was no longer just against Langston. It was about understanding the complexities of survival in a world that thrived on division. Langston's grin returned, triumphant. "See, Caleb? No heroes here, only shades of gray. You're too late to turn back now." But Caleb, steeling himself against the rising tide of doubt, knew that the time for clarity had come. He had to choose a path that transcended the petty games of power and corruption. The true fight was for understanding, for unity amidst chaos. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the faces of both allies and adversaries, Caleb felt a renewed sense of purpose. He took a breath, ready to confront not just Langston, but the very nature of the fight ahead. "You may think you've won, Langston," he said, his voice steady. "But this is just the beginning. You've underestimated us all." With that, he turned to the crowd, rallying their spirits once more, ready to forge unexpected alliances against a common enemy. The stakes had risen, but so too had their resolve. The truth, once whispered, would now ring out loud and clear, and Caleb knew that the final battle would be fought with courage, compassion, and an unyielding quest for justice. Caleb stood firm, his gaze sweeping over the faces that now reflected a mix of fear and determination. The rising sun cast long shadows, emphasizing the weight of their shared burden. He felt the pulse of the land around him, a reminder that this struggle was not just for survival, but for dignity and respect. "Langston may think he has power," Caleb declared, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But power built on lies is as fragile as a house of cards. We stand on truth, and truth has a way of cutting through the darkest of nights." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, the tension in the air thickening with anticipation. A mother clutched her child closer, and an elder nodded solemnly, recognizing the pivotal moment. They were no longer just victims of circumstance. They were a force united by purpose. As Caleb spoke, he saw figures emerging from the tree line. The Native Americans who had sought refuge in his home, now standing at the edge of the crowd, were no longer mere shadows in the background. They stepped forward, their presence a powerful testament to resilience. With them, they carried the weight of their ancestors' stories, the pain of their past, and the hope for a future free of oppression. "Together, we can expose Langston for what he is," Caleb continued, his heart racing with conviction. "Corruption festers in the dark, but we will bring it into the light. We have allies among us. We have the truth on our side. Let us stand firm against the tyranny that seeks to divide us." Langston, sensing the shift in momentum, stepped forward, a sneer plastered across his face. "You think this is your moment, Caleb? You think a few words will save you?" His voice dripped with condescension, aiming to sow doubt among those who dared to challenge him. But Caleb's resolve only strengthened. "Words are not just words, Langston. They are the foundation of our actions, and we are ready to act." With a nod from the elders and a determined look from the Native Americans, the crowd shifted, forming a wall of solidarity. They were no longer isolated individuals but a unified front against the oppressive force of Langston and his ilk. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the resolve in their eyes, Caleb felt a shift in the air, a charge of energy that whispered promises of change. The confrontation was imminent, but it would not be just a clash of fists and firearms. This was a battle for the soul of the community, and they would fight it with intelligence and courage. A sudden rustle in the nearby brush caught Caleb's attention. Out from the shadows stepped a figure he recognized, a former deputy who had once served under Langston. The man looked torn, his loyalty to the corrupt system evident, but his conscience battling for freedom. "Caleb," he called out, his voice strained, "I need to talk. There's more at play here than you know." Caleb's heart raced. This could be the key to unraveling Langston's twisted web. "Then speak," he urged, knowing that every piece of information could tilt the scales of justice in their favor. The deputy took a deep breath, glancing nervously at Langston, before locking eyes with Caleb. "There's a shipment coming in. Illegal goods. Langston's planning to use it to incite chaos, to further divide us, and tighten his grip on power." A hushed silence fell over the crowd as the implications sank in. This was a conspiracy that reached deeper than they had imagined, and it was happening right under their noses. Caleb's mind raced, formulating a plan. "Then we use this knowledge," he said, determination igniting in his voice. "We expose Langston's scheme and show the people what he truly is. We will not just confront him. We will dismantle his empire of lies." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, their spirits rising with the hope of action. Caleb felt the weight of their trust, and he knew that together, they would face whatever darkness lay ahead. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not just change their fate, but challenge the very fabric of their society. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a bright light on the path forward, Caleb took a step toward the future, ready to confront Langston and the insidious forces that threatened to tear them apart. The battle for justice had begun, and the truth would be their greatest weapon. Caleb gathered the group, their faces etched with determination as they prepared for the confrontation. They moved through the dusty streets, each step resonating with the weight of their shared resolve. The air crackled with tension, a palpable reminder of the stakes they faced. "Remember," Caleb cautioned, his voice steady and commanding, "we don't need to draw guns to settle this. Our strength lies in the truth. We'll gather evidence and expose Langston's treachery for all to see." As they approached the saloon, the heart of Langston's operations, A sense of unease settled over Caleb. The establishment buzzed with patrons, unaware of the storm brewing just outside. He could almost feel the corrupt atmosphere within, thick with deceit and ambition. Caleb signaled to his companions, who fanned out to gather intel. They would listen, watch, and wait for the right moment to strike. As they infiltrated the saloon, whispers of Langston's plans floated through the air, confirming their fears. "Make sure we're ready," Caleb instructed, keeping his voice low. "We'll need to act swiftly before he can tighten his grip on the chaos he's about to unleash." The group settled into position, hearts pounding as they observed the menacing figure of Langston, flanked by his loyal enforcers. The man oozed authority, his every word wrapped in manipulation. Caleb's resolve hardened. They had to unveil the truth before it was too late. In that moment, a young woman caught Caleb's eye from across the room. She was Native American, her presence commanding yet vulnerable, a reminder of why they were fighting. He recognized her as one of the survivors who had sought refuge at his ranch. Her eyes met his, a silent plea for help. Before Caleb could react, the door swung open, and a group of men stormed in, their faces twisted with anger. "Langston," one of them shouted, "we know what you're planning. You won't get away with it." Chaos erupted as the tension escalated, with patrons diving for cover. Caleb seized the opportunity, racing toward the bar where Langston held court. "Enough," he shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. Langston turned, surprise flickering across his face, quickly replaced by a sneer. "And what do you think you can do, Caleb? You're outnumbered and outmatched." "Am I?" Caleb countered, pulling out a piece of evidence he had gathered, a ledger detailing Langston's dealings with known criminals. "This will prove your conspiracy and expose you for the fraud you are." Langston laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "You think that will save you? You'll be dead before the sun sets." But Caleb stood firm, rallying the crowd behind him. "No more fear, no more silence. Together we'll bring your crimes into the light." As the crowd began to shift, emboldened by Caleb's words, Langston's expression darkened. The room crackled with energy, and Caleb felt the tide turning. He knew they had to act fast. The truth was their weapon, but time was running out. With a sudden movement, one of Langston's men lunged at Caleb, but he sidestepped and grabbed a nearby bottle, shattering it against the ground. "You'll have to do better than that," he shouted, rallying his companions. The saloon erupted into chaos, but amid the turmoil, Caleb focused on Langston, who was backing away, realizing the tide was turning against him. "This isn't over, Caleb," Langston hissed, slipping out the back door. Caleb's heart raced as he realized the confrontation was only just beginning. They had exposed a fragment of the conspiracy, but Langston was still out there, and his grip on power was far from broken. "Gather the evidence. We'll need every piece to bring him down," Caleb commanded. The atmosphere shifted from fear to resolve, the crowd moving with purpose. As they began collecting the scattered papers and testimonies, Caleb felt a surge of hope. They had taken the first step toward dismantling Langston's empire, but the next challenge loomed ahead. They would have to confront not just the man, but the system that allowed such corruption to thrive. With the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the saloon, Caleb knew that the true battle for justice was just beginning. Caleb gathered the townsfolk outside the saloon, the weight of their collective anxiety pressing down like the heavy clouds gathering overhead. "Listen up," he called, his voice steady despite the urgency in his heart. "Langston's not just a man, he's a cancer feeding off our fears. We've seen what he's capable of, and we're not going to let him silence us anymore." The townsfolk murmured among themselves, the embers of courage igniting in their eyes. Each one had their own grievances, their own stories of exploitation and loss, but together they formed a chorus of defiance. Caleb could feel their resolve building, but he knew words alone would not suffice. Action was needed. "We need to gather more than just evidence," he continued, pacing among them. "We need allies. The Native Americans we helped. If we can prove Langston's deceit, they can be our witnesses. We must find them before Langston does." With a plan forming, Caleb divided the townsfolk into groups, some to gather testimonies from those who had suffered at Langston's hands, others to search for the Native American families they had sheltered. Each person moved with a renewed sense of purpose, and Caleb felt the weight of leadership settle upon his shoulders. As night fell, the dim glow of lanterns illuminated their paths, casting flickering shadows. Caleb took a moment to breathe, leaning against the cool wood of the saloon wall. He could not shake the feeling that Langston would retaliate soon. He wouldn't let this slip away without a fight. The next day, Caleb and a small party ventured into the nearby hills, retracing their steps to find the families they had sheltered. The journey was fraught with tension, the stillness of the forest echoing their fears. They finally reached the clearing where the Native Americans had camped, but the sight that greeted them sent a chill down Caleb's spine. The camp was abandoned, signs of a hasty departure littering the ground. A few belongings lay scattered, a blanket, a child's toy, and a single painted stone. Caleb knelt down, feeling the weight of despair settle over him. "They've been taken," he whispered, rage simmering just beneath the surface. Before he could gather his thoughts, a rustling emerged from the trees, and a familiar figure stepped forward. Ren, a young man from the tribe, his face a mixture of relief and fear. "They came for us, Caleb. We barely escaped, but they took my sister. They said she would pay for your interference." Caleb's heart sank. Langston's cruelty had no bounds, and now it was personal. "We will get her back," he vowed, his voice steady. "But we need your help. We need to draw him out. If we can unite everyone, the townsfolk, your people, we can confront him together." Ren nodded, determination igniting in his eyes. "We will stand with you, but we need to act quickly. The longer we wait, the worse it will be for my sister." The two men returned to town, their spirits bolstered by a new alliance. Caleb organized a meeting that night, bringing together the townsfolk and the Native Americans. The air buzzed with tension, everyone acutely aware of the storm brewing on the horizon. As they huddled together, Caleb stood before them, the weight of their hopes resting on his shoulders. "Langston thinks he can divide us, that he can crush our spirits. But together we are stronger than he can imagine. We fight for justice, for those who cannot fight for themselves." A murmur of agreement surged through the crowd, voices rising as they pledged their support to one another. Yet as Caleb looked around, he felt a pang of doubt. Would they truly stand united when faced with the formidable power of Langston? Just then, a voice cut through the gathering. "What's the plan, Caleb?" It was Sarah, her fierce spirit shining through her determined gaze. "We can't just confront him head-on without knowing what we're up against." Caleb nodded, acknowledging her wisdom. "We'll need a distraction, something to pull Langston's attention away from us. If we can expose his dealings publicly, we might have a chance to rescue Ren's sister without a direct confrontation." The strategy began to unfold, layers of deception being woven into their plans. They would use the evidence they had gathered to create chaos, to sow doubt in Langston's followers. But they needed to act quickly. Every moment spent in indecision was a moment lost for Ren's sister. As the night wore on, Caleb felt a resolve solidifying within him, a determination not just to confront Langston, but to dismantle the very system that allowed men like him to thrive. In the darkness, the flickering lights of their gathering illuminated the faces of warriors ready to fight for their future. The final confrontation loomed ahead, not just for justice but for the very soul of their community. And in that moment, Caleb knew that they would not face it alone. In the dawn's early light, Caleb and his newfound allies emerged from the shadows, their resolve hardened like the rugged landscape surrounding them. The air crackled with tension as they approached Langston's stronghold, a den of deceit cloaked in the guise of authority. Their hearts beat as one, united by a shared purpose that transcended their differences. As they entered the town square, Caleb raised a hand, calling for silence. The murmurs of the gathered crowd hushed, eyes wide with anticipation and fear. "People of this town," he shouted, his voice steady, echoing against the wooden facades, "you've been blinded by the lies fed to you by men who seek only power for themselves. It's time we unveil the truth." He gestured toward the evidence they had collected, carefully piecing together the corrupt dealings of Langston and his cohorts. With each revelation, the tide began to turn. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the crowd, anger igniting where complacency had once reigned. Caleb felt the strength of the community behind him, a force rising like the sun breaking through the horizon. Just then, Langston emerged, a figure cut from the mold of arrogance, fury bubbling beneath his composed facade. "You think you can sway these people with your lies, Caleb? They're loyal to me," he sneered, his eyes cold as steel. But Caleb stood firm, undeterred by the menace that dripped from Langston's words. "Loyalty built on deception is a fragile thing," he retorted. "What do you think will happen when they learn the truth about your greed? The very people you've exploited will rise against you." As the crowd listened, the tension transformed into a palpable energy. The truth had a way of cutting through the darkness, and with every word, Caleb felt the weight of history shifting. The community, once fractured by fear, began to coalesce around the ideals of justice and integrity. Langston's face paled as the murmurs turned to shouts of anger and betrayal. He realized too late that his power was not invincible. It was built on a foundation of lies that could crumble at any moment. In that moment of panic, Caleb saw the shift in the crowd. Men and women who had long suffered under Langston's reign of manipulation now found their courage. With a deftness that spoke of both intellect and heart, Caleb directed the crowd to the documents that exposed Langston's corruption. The alliances forged in the dark, now burning brightly in the light of truth. The gathered townsfolk surged forward, confronting Langston, ready to reclaim their dignity. As he was cornered, Langston's bravado slipped away, revealing a man stripped of his power. "This isn't over," he spat, but the words fell flat against the tide of justice washing over him. In that moment, Caleb understood that the battle they fought was not merely against Langston, but against a legacy of prejudice and division. Together, they had chosen courage over fear, mercy over vengeance. The morning sun bathed them in a golden glow as they realized the strength found in unity. As the townsfolk reclaimed their voices, Caleb turned to Wren, who stood beside him, her heart filled with hope. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice resolute. "We have a long road ahead, but together, we will forge a new path." And so, under the vast expanse of the American sky, they took their first steps toward a future built on justice, where the bonds of humanity would guide them through the trials yet to come. In the end, the heart of the West beats strongest in the face of adversity, where mercy and courage find their place, illuminating the way for generations to follow. And as the dust settled, the question lingered. What kind of legacy will you choose to leave behind?